this is very important too. So for those listening, it's important that you understand the differences because you have athletes, and that's something that's kind of taken over in MMA now. Is like really good athletes. You know, when I train Greg Hardy, he's a really good athlete, so I have to train him a little bit differently. And then you have fighters, like a fighter's fighter, a guy like Robbie Lawler. Now, don't get me wrong, he's an athlete too. Like all fighters have some element present of all these different four attributes, but some of them just stand out more. So you talk about a guy like Robbie Lawler, he's a fighter's fighter. I mean, he will fight in a parking lot. And then you have artists, you know, more creative type fighters like John Jones, who are just like really creative and just you know, they just love to be there and showcase their skills. And then you have competitors like Ben Askren. Now Ben Askren is kind of an artist and a competitor, but in terms of competition, I've never seen a better competitor than a guy like Ben Askren. You know, it's a science and it's also an art. You know, the science is, you know, the techniques that work. You know, like if you apply an armbar the right way, it's going to work. You know, so like that's the science of it. And then the art of it is how you are able to express those techniques. So like, you know, the art of it is like, you know, you can put combinations together, like say armbar, triangle, Kimura. But an artist, in terms of that type of fighter, is very creative with that. So you have to allow them kind of this freedom to express themselves, and you can't really tell them exactly what to do. Now, that's very different from an athlete, because an athlete, you got to tell them exactly what to do. Like a guy like Greg Hardy is like, all right, Greg, here's exactly what I want you to do. I want you to throw your right hand and throw your left hook. An artist, a more creative type person, you say, all right, man, here's a circumstance. Show me what you're made of. Well, Tyron's a very creative guy. It's weird because he's an athlete and an artist. He's not really a fighter. And I know that sounds bad sometimes, like, because, you know, we're programmed to think that because we fight, you have to be a fighter. But he's not really a fighter. Like, he's not the type of guy who's going to be fighting in a parking lot. Like, he doesn't want to take one to give one. So he's more of an athlete and an artist. I mean, he's a very creative individual. Yeah, absolutely. Dustin is a fighter's fighter. I mean, I probably should have used him as the example because he exudes fighter out of his blood. I mean, that's just him. Like, and he'll tell you now, like he told me the other day, he says, I only do two things. He said, I don't do many things good, but I can fight. So like, that's what Dustin is. At that size he is, you know, you don't really get to see an individual, you know, that weighs 280 pounds that could move like Greg Hardy. So at that size, he's the best athlete. But I think the two best athletes I've ever worked with are probably Tyron Woodley and Kyoji Horiguchi. I mean, just athletically, they are just phenomenal. You know, Greg is still very young at the sport. And for him to be fighting at the level that he's fighting at inside the UFC, under all the conditions and the stress that comes along with being in the UFC, Greg did a really good job of executing the game plan. Again, it comes down to that chemistry that we have now. And I understand how his brain operates as an athlete. So talking to him, I have to talk to him slightly different. But I thought he did a good job of executing what we wanted to. It ended a little short, so we didn't really get a chance to see all that he was capable of. But he answered a lot of questions. Everybody's always talking about, well, how about his takedown defense? How about his takedown defense? I think he showed a pretty good example of what his takedown defense is. It's tough, man. I mean, everybody's like, you know, after that fight, because Walt Harris was on that card, you know, a lot of people don't like Greg. So they're like, Greg should fight Walt Harris. But let's look at Walt Harris's career. Like, Walt Harris has been doing this forever, and Walt Harris has been in the UFC. And, you know, Walt Harris should be fighting for a title soon, you know. And I told Walt Harris that 10 years ago when I met him. I said, man, one day you're going to fight for a UFC title because I know how gifted he is. And, you know, Greg is, and I'm going to be honest, Greg's not ready for a guy like Walt Harris yet. And so that's one guy I don't think he should be fighting. But I think Greg should be, you know, there's a lot of guys in the division that Greg still needs to prove himself against. And, you know, let's not, you know, try to rush this young man. He's 32, 33 years old, maybe. You know, I think the prime of a heavyweight is about 35. So let's give him some time to develop. I will say this, though. And I didn't really coach him, but I'll say the least nervous fighter I've ever been around is Ben Askren. I mean, there's two guys that come to mind in terms of being not nervous at all. Ben Askren and Nico Price. Ben Askren, just because he's such a great competitor, he just loves to compete, and he wants to compete at the best and the highest level. And then Nico Price, because he's just an animal, man. Like, he's just a wild man that just loves to have fun and be out there. He's here now in Edmonton. He's going to fight Jeff Neal tomorrow. And just being around him, his energy is great because he just loves what he's doing. I'd have to say within my career, it fluctuated. Early in my career, I was so young and dumb that like it didn't really register to me that I was about to get into a fist fight in front of thousands of people and that I could die. So like that never like registered. So I was too young and dumb to be nervous. And then as I got older and kind of the whole magnitude of fighting got bigger, and it was growing, so it was getting bigger. So I started getting more and more nervous. I'll tell you, like, two fights that I was really nervous for. I was really nervous for Matt Serra and Jeremy Stevens, and not sure why Matt Serra, but I think it was kind of the trash talk, and I was like, oh no, we are talking a lot of trash. I got to live up to this. And then Jeremy Stevens, because this was his very first fight in the UFC. Hard to imagine, right? Because he's such a veteran now, but it was his first fight in the UFC. And I was expected to win, so I was kind of nervous about that. Please follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I always feel like I have some unique point of views on some of the things that I'm talking about. So Instagram and Twitter at Dean Thomas. All of it is the same, spelled D-I-N Thomas. You can also check out my online BJJ Academy at trainbjjonline.com. And then look at Dana White looking for a fight. Me and Matt Serra, Dana White, we always have a good time.